my name is Alex Sumsky. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Forever Network, and we're a social-first media company. And today I'm talking about audience development in the social age. Just so I can quickly get a bit of a sense, how many people here are business owners currently? Okay. Everyone else looking to start a business? Right. Okay. And how familiar are all of you with? A lot of you have like social strategies already for your business and looking to learn more about that? Okay. Right. I'll give you a little bit of background, who I am, what I do, and how I got started. It was 2011 was when we first sort of founded the initial stages of our company, Forever Network, which is, we're now a global social-first sports media company, but at the time we were just a operation of 1 to 2 people. It was really like 2 of us, just kind of getting our heads around the inner machinations of social and how we would ultimately distribute content through it. What we actually do is we had this concept really early on, and it was, we looked at the sort of the publishing model that existed at the moment, or at the time, around how companies were very web focused, and web properties were sort of the focus as far as content distribution and news and media consumption went. And our philosophy was more about this sort of meeting people where they were at philosophy, and how could we make this experience more native. And the idea of social first publishing was something that was kind of really, really exciting to us. We saw that as a huge opportunity, and we saw it as kind of the future of publishing. So that was kind of the bare bones idea behind what got us started as far as Forever Network went. It wasn't something that I pursued straight away. It's something that it was obviously a nice little side project for myself, but when I graduated from high school, I was told by everyone that, this is probably not something you should pursue. You're going to have problems. You're going to have this, that, every sort of thing that every person who's trying to do anything hears. When I graduated, I ended up getting a full-time role at another startup, and I did 12 months there, and that kind of gave me like quite a bit of operating experience. I worked in audience development in that role too, and I worked with them right from when they were a startup all the way up until they listed on the ASX. And that's when I left, and I thought that I had a pretty solid foundation that could help me launch my own venture. What we actually do is create snackable sports content for our social first generation. We're targeted at men aged 16 to 35, and as I mentioned before, meeting audiences where they were at was paramount to our success. We have 2 verticals currently. Basketball Forever being sort of the flagship sports vertical that we launched, and then we've got 2 more in development that we'll be launching later this year in MMA and in soccer. We also learned pretty quickly as we started to get considerable traction. In 2017, we did 3.9 billion content impressions. We did 350 million video views cross-platform. And we had 500 million social engagements. And brands were very attracted to the concept of being able to obviously not only grow their audiences, customer base, but how they could tap into these sort of content processes and build their communities and reach customers in a more engaging way too. So we got into the business of also on selling white labeled content. We'd create them directly for the brands and sell that directly to them as sort of like a secondary revenue model. So to give you a little bit of background on the market and sort of how it's currently positioned, there's a couple of other businesses that are also playing in the same space. You can see this is sort of the social first content market. Social being really the only place that millennials engage daily. The only sport was for us the only topic that we found that most males would engage with daily as well. And then sport was, really yet to receive, venture investment at any sort of significant scale when we first started the company. A lot of these companies were able to build quite a, significant amount of value off building social audiences from a pretty early stage. And that was because it was really in around 2012-13 that the market began to be, a little bit of a shift, and they began to really identify that, social audiences you were able to eventually kind of groom a fan into having sort of a propensity to consume and transact. And this became, really, really powerful for media publishers. But this isn't just a powerful, sort of tool for media publishers alone. This is something that, businesses utilize every single day. And that was, something that we identified pretty early on, and it was kind of the whole, reason for us starting the company and getting into this space. As I mentioned before, millennials consume content, vastly differently to the way they did sort of 5-6 years ago. There's, some statistics say that now 75% of millennials say that they get their news and information through social media. This is like the primary sort of touch point for brands now to reach people. And social is now the largest media distribution channel in history. We've never had a larger group of people consuming content online, and social being obviously the driving force behind that. More people use Facebook now than any other platform in the world. And media buyers have only really just seen this shift in around 2015-16, and lots of advertising dollars have now shifted there. A lot of companies who are looking to do experimental advertising too, who are maybe more conservative. This is one of the most important sort of things that they'll try and test out at some point during any sort of financial year, because they're kind of following suit with every other company now. So it's become incredibly powerful, and there's a huge opportunity there. But of course, not everyone's looking to be in media. There's quite a every single brand can utilize sort of the growth strategies that we incorporate into our company to kind of get to where we are today. So the main question is, why do publishers sort of shy away from social? And not just publishers, why do brands, some brands, why do companies, some SMEs, lots of companies, but publishers in particular, sort of tend to shy away from social? So there's sort of 4 main reasons for this. The first one being like algorithm changes. Now Facebook go through, I think in the past 6 years, there have been maybe a dozen sort of algorithm changes. The news feed changes the way that it distributes content to its users. And that's ever changing, and staying on top of that is sort of one of the most important things that anyone can really, if you can get your head around that, you can get your head around basically every other aspect of social growth. Has anyone familiar with the term edge rank? Has anyone heard of that before? Okay, so to give you a little bit more of background around it, edge rank is basically the cornerstone of Facebook's algorithm. So it kind of works a little bit like this. You've got 4 parts that make up an edge rank. You have your affinity score, your edge weight, and the time decay. So the edge is the story or the piece of content, and the edge weight is how valuable it is to an audience member or to someone who's having the content distributed to them. The affinity score is what sort of relationship you have with not only the brand or publisher who's sharing the content, but the people in your friendship group who are interacting with it. And then, of course, time decay. How long ago was the edge created? How long ago was something posted? If it's, once it reaches sort of that 24-hour period, depending on your how often you spend time on Facebook, that could be, if you're visiting it, say 5, 6, 7 times a day, 24 hours will be the average life cycle of a piece of content on your newsfeed. If you're visiting it once every day, maybe that extends to 48 hours. If you are barely going on, content from a week ago will appear on that newsfeed because you haven't had the opportunity to consume it yet, and the algorithm knows that. So the reason why this is so important is because you have to, once you understand how Facebook changed this on a sort of month-to-month basis and how you can better use it, it kind of ends up dictating your content strategy, which ultimately dictates how your audience is going to grow. So I'll create a bit of a hypothetical. If we're posting, so let's just say I'm a publisher and the topic is politics, American politics in particular, and I make a post about Donald Trump. And what I would be thinking about when I'm creating the content is I'm taking these three things into consideration. So first of all, the affinity score is going to be based on what sort of relationship does this audience have with your brand or page. Is this something that they're visiting every couple of days? Are they seeing your content a lot? Are they going to the page to see the content? Or maybe are they just scrolling by, not interacting, not engaging? If that's the case, that content's going to be deprioritized in their newsfeed, whereas it's going to get quite a little bit of an uptick if you're someone who's really interested in Donald Trump and you're seeing Donald Trump content multiple times a day, every single week. During the election, pages, companies like Group 9, who's almost $1 billion company now, built their entire operation off of 5 or 6 several social audiences. None of them have websites. This is the only way they distribute content to their audience. They identified pretty early on that Donald Trump was something that was consistently going viral within their audience. So they obviously prioritized that content. They could build up the affinity score that audiences had with their brand. And then when the election was over, Donald Trump wasn't as interesting, they could stray from that, post other content, but still be reaching people. The engagement rate dropped a little bit, but that's kind of neither here nor there at the end of the day if you can increase the base in which amount of people that you can reach. With the edge weight, shares are the most important thing anyone can possibly have as far as social media goes. If you can get someone to share a piece of content, that is the highest barrier for anyone on Facebook. So content that is constantly shared, that obviously increases the edge weight and ultimately affects the affinity score, and ultimately affects how often you're going to be seeing this content. And it increases the audience members' propensity to opt in, subscribe, like, follow. The most important part of this funneling down. If you think of content as top of the funnel, the ultimate goal is to have them a part of your community so that they can ultimately become a customer or an audience member or someone that will transact. There's some sort of opportunity there, whether it's you can monetize them through advertisements or e-commerce or whatever your end goal is. And then time decay, like I said, if I skip to this is how we sort of think about it. The value of the information sort of decreases the more time you spend not doing anything about it. Time spent not acting on creating some content around whatever the topic is, or if you've got some sort of really, really great piece of content that's really relevant today and you're publishing it tomorrow, it just becomes infinitely less valuable. So the quicker you can act on it, the greater the effect of it. So the algorithm changes is one of the primary reasons publishers strayed from social, because navigating that is a huge pain in the backside. Sometimes it's constantly changing, every sort of quarter, and you need to be able to work out how your business is best placed to tackle it, and that involves making changes. You need to be dynamic in the social space. If you're not, you're unfortunately just not going to thrive. You need to be, your audience dictates the content strategy, and popularity dictates what's published. And that's what really helped us. We listening to your customers and your audience, and letting them drive the topics was really key for us in establishing the audience really early on. So the other thing was, deprioritization of clickbait. So curiosity gap marketing, which is like the other term for it, was this idea that you would be able to trick people into, driving them into an action. You would withhold some key information so that you could ultimately have them click and read more about something that may or may not be interesting to them. More likely not, for the most part. The reality was that kind of was a pretty successful strategy for a lot of publishers in 2009 to around 2011-12. Facebook made a pretty conscious effort to deprioritize clickbait, and still do to this day. There are big companies and publishing brands, a lot in Australia actually, but more global ones, who have had to sort of shut up shop after January's algorithm change, which basically wiped out all clickbait from news feeds. For the most part, obviously there's no way to get rid of it all, and it's always going to exist. But if this is kind of the cornerstone of how you're driving, interest, it's obviously you're going to be punished on the news feed. You're going to be reaching less people, and the goal, which is to grow your audience, you're not going to move the needle on that ever. So that hurt a lot of publishers. They saw up to 85% cuts in their reach, and that's just as a result of not adhering to these changes that, again, if you're not at the forefront of them, you will get punished. So there was a reprioritization at the same time of meaningful interactions. So, what constitutes a meaningful interaction? Well, it comes back to when we were talking about the edge weights. Someone who shares something, that's a meaningful interaction. Someone who tags a friend in something and writes a comment, that's a meaningful interaction. That sort of stuff gets prioritized. If you can think about how you can create content that drives these sort of interactions without doing any sort of clickbait, then you'll be really successful. It manipulates the algorithm in a positive way that drives reach, and when we're talking about our funnel, eventually drives growth. A great example is if you can create something, maybe really moving and powerful for someone to share, like a social message that can be shared to their friends, or something that's really funny and original that can also have people wanting to share it with their friends. That's suddenly, really interesting content that'll help grow your audience. But of course, not everyone's in the position to be creating and pumping out sort of this high value content for their brands, especially if you aren't a publisher. So you have to obviously operate within your means. One of the best ways that I think about it is back in 2014, for the other company that I worked for, we used to work specifically with SMEs to grow their customer base through social. Sometimes it would just be, very simply around, if it was a cafe, for example, they're not going to be looking to do funny skits, but it's very easy to show a little bit of, employee camaraderie, behind the scenes snippets, that sort of interesting sort of content that wasn't really front facing, wasn't really the sort of content that cafes were sharing. You would find that audiences actually grow fond of that. They like to see that you are not a brand, but you will personalize, that experience for them. If you can personalize the content and make it something that they can relate to, that's really interesting to people, and that's the sort of stuff that ends up getting bumped. And when your ultimate goal is high levels of reach, it's the best sort of stuff to sort of be distributing. But you got to workshop it. Like and it's a lot of testing and learning, a lot of A/B testing. And once you find something that's successful, it's just a rinse and repeat. You take what was successful for yourself, and you find other ways of distributing, applying the same principles to other pieces of content. How can I do this again and make it more successful than the last time? And that was the sort of thinking that we sort of ingrained in ourselves in order to stimulate growth for us. And the last thing is owned and operated platforms over distributed platforms. So publishers were hyper obsessed, obviously, with their web properties, which is considered O&O, owned and operated. This is something that they own themselves. They own 100% of it. It's controlled by no one else but themselves. And that's what they want to drive people to, because there's the value there. You can drive people to a website, and then you can collect, ad money. And that was the way the publishers did business. But the advantage of distributed platforms is that there is no ceiling to the amount of people that you can be reaching. And once you start to implement some sort of key strategies into your content, then distributed platforms become quite lucrative, because you can go from, say, reaching 10 or 15,000 people to hundreds of thousands of people, every single month. Because you've eliminated that ceiling. The disadvantage is that you don't own the platform. It's not yours. You don't own Instagram. You don't own Facebook. You don't own Twitter. You don't own Snapchat. These things could, shut up shop tomorrow, and you wouldn't know what to do. That's like the common thinking that a lot of publishers have. But the reality is that's just as likely as Google shutting up shop, or people who build websites. If WordPress shut up shop, what would you use? If Squarespace didn't exist, I mean, that's a consideration that everyone you have for every single thing you do. But the benefits of distributed platforms for publishers outweigh the negatives now, and that's why it's become sort of the cornerstone of a lot of these really successful media companies who have all now made the pivot to social first. So content is king, but so is knowing what works. And a lot of the time, people get this very, very wrong, and it can really, really punish them. Even if they've got good ideas, if the way you're distributing it is not good, it's not going to sort of get the sort of traction you're looking for. So there's sort of three key things on a headline level. Number one is aesthetics. Creating a really unique look and feel, consistent across your brand, is the perfect way to become eye-catching on news feeds and whatever else. To even if people aren't necessarily following you, it's a great way for you to become well acquainted with your brand, and then eventually, when they do convert, they're really comfortable with, they recognize you and that they know what they're getting, and there's sort of an element of consistency there. This is another really great one. We found that a lot of publishers and businesses, they really like to take a step back and make it more about this is the brand speaking, and this is what the company has to say, and it's all in third person, and it's this and that, and that is fine. It was fine. But if you look at the companies that are thriving and having a lot of success on social, it was the ones that really nailed tone of voice, and that's really personalizing that and making it a little bit more, just humanizing the experience a lot more. If you can have a conversation with the audience, encouraging conversation, relating to them, speaking the way they would speak, this is the sort of stuff that really resonates with audience members and customers. And it's a great way to build rapport over time. And then dimensions. So that might seem like a little bit of an obscure one, but it's actually one of the most common problems. Dimensions, if you do not have the correct dimensions for the sort of content that you're publishing, it can actually be a little bit punishing. For instance, when you're doing graphics, if you're not doing a square, when you're doing native publishing, you're going to be deprioritized. Squares are the most prioritized form of photo whenever you're publishing. If you're doing sort of these horizontal photos where it's sort of like cover photo dimensions, but you're publishing it directly to your feed, you're going to be punished. And the same goes for profile pictures. The same goes for video as well. It used to be people used to do these 16:9 sort of aspect ratio videos. Now square videos are the most prioritized form of video on social media, thanks to Instagram. Applying that to Facebook, who own Instagram, that you get high prioritization. What it actually means is you will probably see 65–70% increase on video views and interactions on square video as opposed to like sort of 16:9. And vertical video as well is something that works incredibly well. Less so on Facebook, but a lot on Instagram, and definitely obviously for stories. It's one of the most engaging sort of forms of content today. And real estate is one of the most important things when it comes to a newsfeed. The less real estate you're taking up on someone's mobile screen, the less likely you are to sort of engage them and get their attention. So it's just sort of, it's almost common sense that you would really want to be taking up as much of their screen as possible rather than having this little sliver. So then, as far as what's prioritized right now, as of today, square video, vertical video, live video, 360 video, stories, and instant articles are the most prioritized forms of content on Facebook today. And these are the ones that stimulate the most growth just because Facebook are pushing them at the moment. So each of them are sort of valuable on their own merits. Obviously these two here, they'll get prioritized in the newsfeed. Live video gets prioritized in the newsfeed, but you can also send notifications to your customers. 360 video and stories on Facebook now exist, and they didn't originally, but brands can now use them as well, and they're getting prioritized too. 360 video is showing up in the newsfeed, a lot more, almost 25% more than any other form of video. And then instant articles is one of the main reasons that publishers are being able to survive with long form content. Originally, you would post a link to your site and people would click it, and that was the sort of entire process. But Facebook are very conscious of trying to keep people on Facebook for as long as possible. So if you play to that a little bit, you can work it to your advantage. Instant articles, which is a very easy thing to configure and set up, is one of the best ways to have something, a engaging sort of long form piece, whether it be a blog post or even if it's like an advertisement masked as opposed with a call to action at the end. Having it in an instant article is the best way to get people's attention. It's the best. It's a one-click sort of process, and it loads instantly because it's all native, and the entire experience gets prioritized by Facebook in the newsfeed as well. So you're going to have a huge uptick in the amount of people you reach. So how we did it and how you can do it too, I sort of touched on it briefly, but these are sort of like the key principles that we operate off of, and these are really easy things that you're able to sort of implement into your social strategy as well, and to sort of spark growth. So the first thing is what we call first to feed, and this is sort of less relevant to, I guess, like businesses, but for publishers, ever since there's been the changes to the news feed, being first to feed is one of the most important things, especially if multiple people are sharing the same story. If you're able to get something out really, really quickly and be there first, it's going to ultimately be the one that gets the most traction. You'd think that's you'd think that's an easy one, but you'd be surprised at the amount of publishers that take this sort of lax approach. The priority is in getting the story completed, and sort of social is an afterthought. But if that's at the sort of the forefront of your mind and trying to get the story out as quickly as possible on there, that's where it's going to ultimately get the most traction compared to other publishers or other people that are posting the same topic or the same story. Pumping out all day, every day. Some people I know there's a lot of people that say, or like, how much is too much? Should I only be posting once or twice a day? The answer is absolutely not. You should be posting as much as you can. There's nothing that Facebook loves more than you spending time pumping out content on their platforms, and they are going to ultimately reward you for that. So the more content that you can distribute and get out on these platforms, the more likely you are to obviously reach people, but the more likely you are to affect that EdgeRank algorithm so that over time you're going to just organically be reaching more people, as opposed to having only 18 or 17% of your audience that you're able to reach, which is the average for publishers, for all pages really. You can sort of bring that up to around 30, 40%, especially if you're operating off a lower base, which most brands are. So the one, parallel your audience. So I kind of talked on it briefly, but paralleling the cultural tone of your target audience is really important. You need to be relevant. If you're going to be publishing content, you need to do a little bit of research into what is your audience, or what are your customers actually interested in? How can you use that to your advantage to build content around their interests? Once you start doing that, you'll find there's just going to be an uptick in engagement, which is going to, and I've said it a lot, but it's going to obviously drive up reach numbers, and you're going to be able to funnel them down into whatever you want, depending on what your business is. Momentum is another really, really important one, and it kind of plays into first to feed and pumping out all day, every day too. As far as momentum's concerned, the success of a post on Facebook and Instagram is determined by the success of the previous post you just made. So if you make something that's really, really unengaging, not interesting, and customers or your audience members are just not buying into it, and then you publish again something that's also equally as uninteresting, it's going to perform even worse than the previous one did as far as reach goes. So if you can apply some of the principles that we sort of discussed, and then you're getting content out fast, and you'll see the results pretty quickly, but it'll start to do well if you can capitalize on that and continue to do more of it, sort of rapid fire, but not too rapid fire. You don't want to flood the feed, just spread it out obviously. But getting that momentum, you'll see that incrementally, every post you do will start to reach more and more people, even without the growth. You won't necessarily be seeing audience growth numbers. The numbers go up, but that base will be going up, and that'll ultimately affect your end goal, which is to grow the audience. So ad hacking is another thing that we did quite early on and still do today. Facebook advertising and Instagram advertising is a whole other beast, and you could talk for hours about sort of how that's done correctly. But if you get an opportunity to dabble in it, the best thing you can do is run multiple ads at a time, targeting sort of different users. We do A/B testing on every single ad set that we run out. So what we'll do, and this is highly effective, we will create 5 or 6 custom audiences, 5 or 6 different ads, and we'll get a piece of content that we think is going to be engaging and interesting. We'll run it, and then we'll target it. We'll put maybe $5 spend on each set, and then we'll run that over 5 days. And then we'll determine, which one, how far did the $5 get us for each of these ad sets? Which was the most successful? Once you work that out, then it was just doubling down on that one, but then for a different piece of content. So we'd save that audience, reattach it to a new piece of content, and then put $100 spend on it. And it would blow your mind how much further the dollar gets you once you're able to do that testing really early on. So we would do that, and then we'd run multiple ads on the same piece of content. So we would say, okay, so of these 5, this was the most successful audience. We'll run it on this content. What other audiences within our audience, what other segments could be interested in this piece that we aren't reaching now? We create another custom set, do the exact same thing. You do that for several weeks. Within a couple of months, you've suddenly got 10 custom audiences that are highly effective for putting ad spend on to reach customers and audience members. And it's just kind of a nice little sort of growth hack in the sense that it's pretty cost effective to do all these tests. And if you're applying all these principles and you're running really highly optimized advertising on top of it, suddenly your numbers are going to be tenfold what they were before you were doing anything at all. Audience retargeting is a great thing. We set up pixels so that every single person that visits our site will also receive Facebook ads relating to what they were looking at on the site. It's pretty commonplace. A lot of businesses do it. It's nothing too secretive about it, but it's just something that we found super effective. If you can pixel audience members, and you can do it through content too. So if you find that 7 or 8 videos in particular are doing really well, you can pixel those audiences, and then when you have another related piece of content that you run, you target it to the pixeled audience. You target to the people that it was performing well with, and you'll reach them again, and they're the ones who are most likely to engage or share or basically have some sort of activity that's going to drive that bottom line reach number, get your brand out there, get the content out there, and stimulate growth. Audience preference settings is another great thing as well. You're able to actually set audience restrictions when you post. So when we post about certain topics, for basketball, it's really very easy for us. When we make a post, you can set an audience preference setting before you make the post, and we just put in a bunch of tags that are relating to the topic that we're publishing about. If it's about the Los Angeles Lakers, if it's a player on that team, we'll make sure the audience preference setting is to people that are interested in Los Angeles Lakers, people that are interested in Kobe Bryant, people that are interested in basically anything that's related to the topic, and then it just performs much better than it would have ordinarily because it's like a highly concentrated sort of segment of people that are going to be the content's most relevant to. Again, all this ends up stimulating growth. And then messenger bots, a little bit more complicated, more difficult to set up, but there are plenty of easy free tools that you can use, and you don't need any coding experience to set these up. There's something called TechCrunch, which is a really great publisher, by the way. But if you are familiar with them, they actually have a really great Facebook Messenger bot that they've given the framework for, that's publicly available for people to implement into download. You can download the software; it's all free, and you can create your own chatbot, hook it up to your page, and then you drive people through ads or even organic content. You can actually set it so that it's prioritized to people that are most likely to message the page. There's nothing more valuable than having a one-to-one person dialogue with audience members and customers. Once you can get that dialogue going, then the power's sort of really in your hands as far as how far you can take that. You can direct message them, be in their inbox with products, for us, breaking news. All of that is really interesting, and it actually drove a significant amount of e-commerce sales for us. So we would have products available in Messenger, and then you could talk to the bot, and it would find the product for you. It would get your size. You could do it all through Messenger, and you could actually ultimately do the transaction through Messenger. And that's another free, easy thing. Requires no coding experience, and you can do it through Shopify. So all of these things were really the driving forces for a lot of our early stage growth. But these are principles we continue to rely on today, and are still highly valuable, and they're not outdated. These aren't things that were relevant to people in 2013 and they think they still work, but they don't. This is what's working today for the highly successful brands. So that is, in essence, the most important parts. But obviously, it doesn't apply to everyone. Everyone has their own specific needs. So I'd love to hear from you about some of the businesses you're working on, some of your experiences, and some of the questions you have about what I've talked about, or something you'd like to know more about, or how I can sort of be of further assistance to you. Now's I think we've got time, right? Then yeah. Okay, I'll throw this. I'm going to throw this to you. Are you ready? I don't want to hit you. Hey.
What's snackable?
That's a good question. So what we characterize snackable as is sort of short, hard-hitting content that's like really easily consumable. So an example of a non-snackable piece of content is someone that writes several paragraphs on a Facebook post, all text, and fires that off. That's not snackable. Snackable is something that someone can consume in several seconds. They can do it while they're scrolling. So it could be a graphic with a huge quote. That is an example of a snackable piece of content. It could be I'm sure you remember Vines, right? The 7-second videos. That's an example of snackable content. It's something easily consumed, short form, but highly engaging, that captures attention and doesn't require too much attention span.
Hey, so we're growing our audience from round zero. We just started up all our social media accounts. What's your opinion on organic growth versus paid growth from just ground zero?
I mean, for us, we were growing our audience at a very different time to you. So it was a lot easier to do what we're doing, what we did back then in 2011 than it is in 2018. But I'm still a big proponent of organic growth. I think you will find that if you're able to grow the audience organically at an early stage, it provides a lot more long-term value for you because the audience is more invested in what you're doing. It's really easy to get people who will, like a page, for instance, off a paid ad, and they're not necessarily that interested in the product. The same can be said as well for organic if you're not engaging with the potential audience through relevant content. So if you're posting memes and you're getting like people to engage and follow you off the back of that, they might not necessarily be very interested in the product you're trying to sell them. I'm a big proponent of really engaging content that relates to your business early on. If you can get friends and family to kind of buy in at an early stage, like get them on, get them engaging, even just get them talking, that's a great place to start. And then that's how we started. It was friends and family. Then it was people at our school. We were almost cold approaching people. We would post directly onto people's walls. This is at a time when it was like okay to do that. It's weird to do that now. But that's the sort of like level we'd go to. Maybe a direct message is better today. But we would say, hey, we think you'd be interested in this, like this page. And once we had that organic base, which was like we got to 1,000 people. That was how, and then we applied these principles to that small audience, and we saw some natural growth. Then we plugged ads into it later. But to get going, we started organic, and I'm a big fan of sort of starting that way. Not to say that you can't have success off paid spend to get it going. But if you do that, my recommendation would be create ads that are video-based, number one. So if you can have someone talking to a camera in some capacity, I'm not 100% sure what your audience or business is, but if that's relevant to you, that's the best way to kind of get people plugged into your page early on, and they're less inclined to drop off then, because again, it kind of ticks a few boxes. It's like a humanized personal experience. It's a little bit of a pitch in a way. You're kind of selling yourself, and people kind of know what to expect. They know what they're getting, and they're more willing to kind of you'll have their share of feed, from lack of a better term. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
When you were talking about having testing ads and stuff, and you said you would run with ad hacking, you would run multiple.
Yeah.
So you would do like one ad set and then run multiple ads underneath that inside of Facebook, and then would you leave it a certain amount of time to work out this audience isn't working, I'm going to kill that ad, and then leave the other ad inside the ad set running?
We try and have as few variables as possible. So basically how it would work is, let's say you have like your piece of content that you've run, and you want to see, like it really depends what your goal is, but let's say the goal is, I want to see which audience set, which ad set I've created is going to drive the most viewers, the most engagement, and the most how many people will be called to an action. Have the same piece of content, the different audiences with one variable change applied to each ad set, and then you see which one performed the best on the exact same spend. If $5 got you 400 people on this one, but it got you 182 on this one, 185 on this one, 200 on this one, you say, oh, well, this variable here was, this was the key. Let's take this audience, this worked with this, and we'll put another $50 on this one, and let's run a couple more now and find some more effective, like sub-audiences that kind of get to a similar level. And then you do that enough. You just got to be like obviously religious about it. But you do it enough, and then you start to see results over time. It's just a bit of a slow grind.
Yeah. So that would be, you would have a kind of an audience inside the ad set, and then you do just tweaks to kind of to the same inside the same niche for each ad underneath the ad set.
Yeah.
And then you do test another audience inside another ad set, and then you have tweaks to each one inside.
That's
the
right.
In the ads under the ad set.
Yeah. You just rinse and repeat that process as much as you can, and then you'll start to see certain segments of your audience are really performing, and it just gives you so much data. Now you can start making decisions around, all right, what else do I think is going to be interesting to these subsets? Suddenly your whole content strategy is dictated by the ones that are actually engaging, and then eventually your entire audience will just comprise of these people. It becomes really easy to kind of service their interests. And that's true, like you could do identical ads and one's always going to perform better, but what you're looking for here are like outliers. So I'm not interested in an audience that's going to drive me, so for us, if we have an audience ad set that drove us 500,000 viewers, and this one drove us 515,000 viewers, 15,000 people to us in the scheme of things is basically nothing. If one's doing 700,000 and one's doing 500,000, then it starts to be a little bit more material.
Have you had any experience like influencer marketing?
There was a period where we were trying to get into that space as an influencer. We thought that would be like the lucrative opportunity. But we learned that it's a different ball game. So there's some really great platforms out there, which you're probably aware of, that you can sign up as an influencer, and you can get people who have campaigns that are looking to pair with an influencer, and you get cash depending on your audience size. It's like $3,000, $4,000, like $5,000 hits for people with audiences over like half a million or something, or 250,000, I think. It's a really powerful mechanism if you've got a product that's like a wearable, or it's some sort of food product, or something that's like consumable. Influencer marketing is like through the roof as far as results goes on that sort of stuff. It works less on selling opportunities, services. It definitely doesn't work for like publishers. Like for instance, we would never use influencer marketing because it's our job to do what they're doing, if that makes sense. Yeah. But if you're selling a product, product placement with good influencers that have strong audiences, if you're prepared to pay for that, it's usually a pretty good payoff. It's usually like value for money more times than not. You just got to find the right people. I find it's really important to set some parameters, like with influencers in particular. If you give them free rein, they'll do what's most comfortable for them. What works more is if you what's going to work, so you set the parameters, you design the campaign, you kind of dictate the content a little bit, because no one knows your customers and audience better than you, and then you hand that over and say, this is how we want it done, this is the frequency, and this is how much we'll pay you for that. Or if it's like an affiliate deal, tell them this is the best, these are the keys for success. You will get the most out of this if you do it this way. If you're still not seeing results, maybe influencer marketing isn't a strategy for your particular product, but you won't know until you try it.
Right. Do you sell a lot of you sell merchandise?
Yes, we do.
Do you sell that directly from your Facebook store, or do you actually sell that via outside?
We do both. So it's split about 70% on site, 20% on the Facebook store, and then I think like the other 10% was through Messenger. So that's kind of how people transact. But on Facebook, we're driving people to the store. It's actually one of the only times we're really interested in driving people to a different site other than it's still our site, but off native like social platforms. It's still very new, Facebook stores, so people aren't super comfortable making purchases through it yet, but that'll change. That'll change once it becomes more commonplace.
And do you see more of your revenue coming from Facebook side?
Our revenue split, it's about 65% will be branded content. So we'll do a brand partnership with another brand. And then the rest of it is kind of split pretty equally between e-commerce, like programmatic advertising, and then like whatever other sort of activities that we have. We might have some sort of like a giveaway where there was like margin on it, or content services where we sold some content to a company, which we do sometimes, and that's the rest. But the skew is still pretty like significantly towards like branded content and advertising. E-commerce like plays a smaller role. It's just a nice to have. You know, it's easy. The margins are good. It doesn't cost us anything because it's all drop ship for us and third-party fulfillment. So we don't even handle the product. We just create them and then they're shipped. Mm-hmm. Vertical is just another word that we use to describe a brand. For instance, so Forever Network is like our overarching company, but then the goal obviously is to launch multiple verticals within that. So basketball forever being one, posterizers being another, football forever being another, MMA forever being another. These are the ones this is what we're rolling out.
How did you get started? Like, where did you turn to?
When we first started, we were just in school at the time, and we just kind of were playing around, testing things. We had kind of a broad, sort of grandiose sort of vision, but we didn't think it would go anywhere, and it was just sort of a little bit of for fun. It didn't really start to take off until I left my job in the end of 2014, and that's when it started to get some serious traction. So we actually went to incubate at Sydney Uni. That was like, we went to a similar incubator sort of program. It was 3 months, business accelerator. And that was really the key for us, because we were able to go through the program pretty quickly. There was mentor mixes, so we would meet other mentors and people who worked in our space who could give us some guidance. It was a great place to network. And we ended up meeting like a bunch of investors. We did our first seed sort of fundraising round like 5 weeks after we'd sort of started there. So we closed the $250,000 seed round. That was to help us sort of just get started. And then now we're not too far off closing a considerably bigger one now, so we can onboard, hopefully like 20 or so staff to help us continue to build what we're building. But it was really, the biggest part for us was kind of networking early on, meeting the people who were in the space, who were doing what we wanted to do, but successfully already, and saying, hey, what can we do better? How can we get better at this? How can we, accelerate this process for us? Can you introduce us to more people? Build our own personal networks up? And then it instills a lot of confidence in investors as well, potential investors. If they see that's the process you're undergoing to kind of build your business, they're more inclined to kind of, invest in you too. They'll be like more interested. They'll take meetings. And I think Mark Cuban said this once: if you ask for money, you'll get advice. If you ask for advice, you'll get money. So, having the opportunity, if you ever are looking to raise capital for your business, which is the biggest thing that'll help you get started, outside of obviously building an MVP and doing the grunt work at the beginning. Just trying to hear what they have to say about your business and taking on advice is the easiest way to kind of get going and start seeing some results.